Ireland is attractive for clinical trials because we have great expertise in Ireland in oncology. And over the last 20 years, since Cancer Trials Ireland was formed, we've had a real focus on clinical trials activity in Ireland. And when you look at the oncologists, both the medical, radiation, surgical oncologists that work in Ireland, the clinical research nurses, the pharmacists, the data managers, all have had exposure to global clinical trials, either in Ireland or through their career development, where a lot of them would have travelled abroad, either to the UK or to the US, or to Australia to train in oncology, and would have been exposed to research trials in that environment. And very often, being Irish, many of them came home, but came home with those networks. And as a result of that, there's a huge, the density of expertise, but also networks in Ireland and in Irish hospitals. And I guess that makes us attractive because there's a familiarity between our members in Cancer Trials Ireland and those working in similar trials all over the world. I suppose the way we would become more attractive in clinical trials in Ireland is to really play to our strengths. We are a small country and we're a small population, and as a result, very often global companies might think, well, there's, what's the point in going to Ireland because it's a small population. But what we can do, and what we could do even better, is become a little bit more nimble and develop harmonized processes, whether that be our ethics committees and how we function when we're looking for ethical approval for our trials. Our regulatory approvals can be quite quick already, but if we were able to become even more organized, harmonized in that space, I think that would be more attractive. The second thing, and I think what's really important as well, is that people in Ireland, the people who get cancer, that's all of us, patients understand the value of being involved in cancer trials, because cancer trials only work if people go on cancer trials. And patients will only go on cancer trials if they feel safe, if they feel comfortable, if they understand what it is to be part of a clinical trial. And we have a great, we've done some research on this recently in Cancer Trials Ireland, and we know that Irish people are supportive of clinical trials, and we know that 1 in 2 of them will partake in a clinical trial, not just in a cancer trial, but in a clinical trial. And that's pretty good when you look at the global attitudes to clinical research. Irish people are quite positive about it, and we've mapped that. That's a change in attitude over the years. So we're delighted about that, but that also makes us more attractive to global companies, because the big challenge when you're running clinical trials is to reach your targets. So you might say, I'm going to recruit 100 patients in this prostate cancer trial in Ireland. And if you don't achieve that, that's a real fail for both the organisation, but also for the trial. But if you do achieve it, and you achieve it in quick time, that's a success. And that's something we'd like to be able to do more of in Ireland. I guess from an environmental point of view, and in all clinical trials, whether you're dealing with cancer or not, it goes back to what I said earlier. There are, you have to get your ethical approval, you have to get your regulatory submission in on time. Your protocol has to be written at a very high level, very high quality, has to be proofed by peer reviews, and all of that takes time. And it's very much dependent on how much resource you're able to put in. It kind of correlates with how quickly you can get through all of those processes. And that's why it's important for scale with Cancer Trials Ireland that we are small, so as a country. And what we try to do is get our investigators to work at a global level with other collaborative groups, so that we have the best expertise to really ensure that we have good quality protocols and trials going to our ethics committees and going to our regulatory authorities. But that's not to say that there's nothing we, as a country, Ireland can do to make that process better. We need to centralise our ethics committees. We need to make the process very clear and transparent and nimble. And we also need to do better in our hospital environment. So at the moment, staff working in hospitals on cancer clinical trials are generally there because of the work that we do in Cancer Trials Ireland and the funding that we raise, either through our own trials or through encouraging pharma to do their trials in Ireland. the health service executive needs to look at how they can create a role within their budgets for clinical trials. And there's a lot, of advantages for that for the health service executive in terms of cost savings, but also in terms of providing options to patients. Because cancer trials isn't a nice thing to have. If you've got a rare cancer or it's an unmet need, and many of them are, you want to be on a clinical trial. You want to have access to a clinical trial. And so it's really within the interest of the HSE and the health service executive to do something about that. And I guess the best vehicle to do it is through the National Cancer Control Programme. Well, what is an investigator-initiated trial? So that's where, a doctor or a clinical research nurse or anyone involved in oncology comes up with an idea. And really the idea is usually outside of the commercial environment. It's within the academic environment, in the not-for-profit environment. And you're thinking about the patient. You're thinking about what does the patient need, and will this research idea fulfill that patient need? And we try to do investigator-initiated trials in Cancer Trials Ireland. That's one of the reasons we were set up, so that our investigators would have an opportunity to trial their ideas. And very often you're looking at trials where, maybe, the commercial world wouldn't necessarily have an interest in it. And I'll give an example. Pancreatic cancer is an area that there aren't a lot of treatments available. It is an unmet medical need. And that's an example of where organisations like Cancer Trials Ireland need to do something. We need to do trials. And thanks to the great work of Pat Smullen, who was a very famous Irish jockey, and sadly passed away this year. He did a lot of work to raise much needed funds for us to run pancreatic cancer trials. So this isn't being funded by pharma, it's not being funded by the government, this is being funded by the public. And that's an example of the kinds of trials Cancer Trials Ireland can do. And we're in the middle of setting up 3 different trials for 3 different areas within pancreatic cancer because of that work. And I guess that's what sets us apart to other commercial-based cancer trials organisations. We work with them too. And we have to work with them, but in terms of what the patients need, and there's some really good treatments out there developed by pharmaceutical companies, that we really want to get into Ireland. We're working with a couple of collaborative groups at the moment to try and do that. So it's not to say that those trials aren't important, they are, but IITs are special for us, and that's an area that we work very hard in. I suppose the value of cancer clinical trials to patients in Ireland is that, when you're a patient and you've been diagnosed with cancer, the very last thing you want to hear is your clinician saying to you, it's time to go and sort out your affairs, and there is nothing more I can do. We in Cancer Trials Ireland strive to change that conversation. We want to be able to say there's a clinical trial that just might help, that just might extend your time on this earth, that might give you time with your family, to go to that wedding, to watch your grandchild's christening, whatever it might be. That's what we strive to be able to do, to change that conversation, and to give hope to patients in Ireland. And sometimes it's even more than that. The trials that we've been involved in have saved lives, have extended lives significantly. But also there are other, we have to be honest, we're not curing cancer by any means, but what we will try to do is offer more time for people who are within that unmet medical needs space. But certainly, you have to look back 20 years ago when this organisation was set up. The patients in Ireland at that time were dying from cancer, where patients in other countries were having options to go on clinical trials and living. And that's why the organisation was set up. And if you look back 20 years ago at those patients with breast cancer, those patients that passed away 20 years ago with breast cancer, and I have family members who were part of that, they're alive today because of the treatments that we've been involved in trialing, and are now widely available to patients. So, cancer isn't what it was 20 years ago, and there's certainly lots of treatments available, but there's still a lot more to do. I'd like to talk about the misconceptions in particular on cancer clinical trials. And very often, and I've been exposed to this in my own family, where a patient is asked to be on a clinical trial and they think, I don't want to be on the placebo. And there's a misconception that means you get nothing. and it's very important that patients know that if you're on a cancer clinical trial, you will always, no matter what is being trialed, you will always be on the standard of care treatment. Whatever that is, even if you were not on the trial, you will get the same standard of care treatment that you were always going to get. And I think that's really important. The other thing people worry about in cancer clinical trials in particular is side effects. So they worry about, well, what are the side effects of this treatment? And patients are right to ask those questions. That's the whole process of informed consent. So when you're going on to a trial as a patient, your clinician has to sit down with you and tell you everything about the trial and what might happen. And that is your opportunity to ask all the questions. Just ask is our campaign theme, and it's there for a reason. And you ask those questions about the side effects. And I'd ask people to consider, well, what would the side effects be on treatment outside of the trial? The standard of care treatment. And it's important to weigh that up, and patients need to weigh that up, that risk benefit. And that takes time. It's not something you're going to do very quickly. You need time to do that, and that's fair. But those are the big concerns that I've certainly been privy to as both a family member of someone who's been on a trial, but also in this job. And they're fair questions. But I think we need to do better in Cancer Trials Ireland to explain the answers to those questions. To patients considering a clinical trial, the very first thing you need to do is talk to your oncologist about a clinical trial, about your disease area, about what's available, and also do your own research as well. In advance of talking to the oncologist or afterwards, look at our website, look at cancertrials.ie, see what trials are open. We have lay summaries of all our trials, so that means that they're written in English for those of us who are not doctors to understand. And also look at other websites like clinicaltrials.gov, which is an international clinical trials website, and see what's going on in other countries, and ask your oncologist about that. And I think that the world is changing a lot, and I think it's important that patients and people who are dealing with cancer in their lives take ownership and ask the questions. And I know that's something that we've seen a lot of very famous patient advocates in Ireland. They've done that to their credit. And I think you should never be afraid to do that. And, there's always more than one doctor available to answer questions on clinical trials. Our oncologists work very closely together, and they work very well together. If there's a trial happening in a different hospital to the one that you're in, very often your oncologist will refer you to the other hospital to have that discussion with the other oncologist, about your potential suitability to a trial. And we've seen that happen on our trials, and that's okay. That's okay. This is your health. This is your plan. And so that we would completely advocate that and support that as a group in Cancer Trials Ireland.